Welcome to the Breakthrough Moments podcast, a podcast where challenges meet opportunities. I'm Harold, and together with my co-host Lasse, we explore stories of innovators, leaders, professionals, and entrepreneurs, and how they turn obstacles into game-changing breakthroughs. Get ready for insights that inspire and lessons that last. Subscribe now, and let's dive into the moments that define success. Welcome to today's episode of the Breakthrough Moments podcast. Today we have Geert-Jan Van Bussel, the owner and director of Van Bussel's document services. With over 31 years of experience between enterprise content management, compliance, governance, and organizational change, he was not just one of the pioneers in the Netherlands, but all of Europe, combining business informatics, business administration, and archiving into one cohesive consulting service. So quite an interesting mix. So join us today to dive into his story and what he has to share. So with that, Geert-Jan, welcome to the episode.
Thank you, Harold. I'm very pleased to be here.
So you have quite an interesting background doing this for close to 3 decades. And I was, when we spoke last, trying to kind of like put the pieces together in terms of what you do. And I got a bit of a hunch and introduction and understanding of it in terms of how archiving is one thing that we typically take for given, and it looked completely different 3 decades ago from today. But like, how would you describe, if you were to be precise and concise, what is it that you actually do?
What is what I'm actually doing? When I started my company, I already had one. I sold one which was active in a classical archiving, so paper archiving. And what we did was working away files who were lit in stables and in attics and in cellars, and we brought them together and we indexed them and we made them ready for public consultation. But I had a background in business administration. I was a business informatics. I've done business informatics, business administration, and after that I did archiving and archival studies. And working in my business with paper files, I thought, but I've done informatics. We've got data, we've got databases, we've got lots of data, and all of those data do have a function. And there are many reasons why you should keep and retain your digital data. And because digital data are produced in software who's working in business processes, that's quite interesting because business administration. And because I'm a specialist in archiving, combining those 3 disciplines brought me to the idea, let's see how it is with digital archiving. I can do there something. And I knew from the business I had that there were many organizations who had problems with storing their data in a way that they could use them years after they were produced. So that was the idea. And that is what I really wanted to do. And in my business, I was mostly background managing, planning, doing human resource management, all that sort of things. But I wasn't working in what I wanted to do in consulting and auditing and managing data and so on. So I thought that was the right moment to sell a part of the company that was mine and starting all over again. And that was the reason why what I'm doing from that moment on is helping organizations with how to manage digital information. And that into the complete information value chain, just from generating information until disposal or definite preservation. And that is what I'm doing since 1992, something like that.
Yeah, so it's, I guess things looked completely different back then compared to now.
Oh yes, they were. Many organizations had their archives, and many organizations liked their archives. They got an archivist, and they had paper files, and when they wanted to do something, they went to the archive room and they asked, it's a file about this and that from that and that time, and so on. They were always wrong because it was not in 1990, it was in 1989. It wasn't about that case, it was about another case, but the one had an idea about what it was going to be, and the indexing was not as good as it should be. So it was already something, but they didn't care about the digital data. They were they are in the software, in the database. We can find them always.
Yeah.
We can find everything, which wasn't true, and they knew that. And they knew they couldn't find records of data. They could find data as it was, but they couldn't find the data for a specific case that has been processed 3 years ago. So they knew they got problems with it, but they didn't think it was archiving or records management, or how they want to call it. And even if they knew it was not perfect, they never said that, because it was modern. You had to work with information technology. It couldn't go wrong. You stored your data, so you always had them. And that was what I saw in many companies, and it was difficult in the beginning to make clear what you were doing. And is it necessary for us? We've got everything. We can find everything. It works. It's no problem. We don't have a problem with long-term preservation, because digital you can store and keep forever. So it cost a long time. Basically for 2 or 3 years before it became clear that digital data is not only about keeping data for a very long time, but it is also about business processes, about making your business processes more efficient or effective, that it is about accountability. So if you're doing something in a digital environment and you're handling cases or insurances or medicines or something like that, you have data about that, and there are many laws who say you have to keep that data for a very long time. And in the beginning they had digital data, but they printed everything they had, so they made digital files, but also paper files, and the paper files they used for accountability and compliance. That got them into trouble, because when you do something digitally in a process, in a software, then that is the data that is important. And when you print something, doesn't mean that a judge has to accept a paper file when you have generated them digitally. So what I did was not talking about archiving, I was talking about data management and business processes. And they have to be careful, that they have to care for those data, so that it was possible for them to use that data as evidence. That was the way I got interest from organizations. So,
that's interesting.
Not talking about archive was necessary to make it possible for organizations to do their archiving better. Don't talk about archives. Talk about data, information management, compliance, governance, accountability, all that sort of terms we had other names for in the beginning. Accountability was not a term we used very much in the beginning. Compliance was more known. So that's the way I started. That's the first 2-3 years were very difficult to get enough clients who were willing to pay. And after that, and doing many presentations at conferences and talking about that and publishing lots of articles in many magazines and many business magazines, I saw that I got a lot more attention from businesses, and that's the way it began to work. So from starting in 1991 to 1995 was the first year that I could say, okay, I can make a profit of it. And from that moment on, it became better every year.
That's good. But it's also interesting, because I've talked with a lot of founders that have said similar type of things, where the core service of what you actually do, that's not it doesn't necessarily have the market resonance that you hope it would be. Like, I've had a couple of other people on the podcast where they had to kind of like spearhead into the market, be like the first mover in terms of this one term, but they had to use other words and other terminology for the market to be able to resonate with it. So that's very interesting. But this wasn't using this and the dynamic of, let's say, archiving being the hot buzzword. that's not the only thing that has changed since you started. Like one of the things that you mentioned last time we spoke was kind of like the balance between auditing and consultation.
Yeah.
And the moral and ethical conflict that basically arises in that. Like, why would you say that it's a ethical question or an ethical problem to both do auditing for someone in terms of documentation, but also do consulting?
Yeah, it was especially an ethical question because I was the only one in the Netherlands that offered that service. So what I did, I had a consulting practice. I have almost 9 years that I only was a consulting firm. And after that, the Dutch government made some new standards, norms about the way applications should work when they were archiving data.
Yeah.
First of that was in 1999, and in 2004 another one came. And then the questions arose in the market. Oh yeah, it's okay, it's nice, you have a standard, but who is going to check on that? Who is going to audit how we are archiving, or we are storing our data in a way that is in accordance with the archives law? So who could check us? There was no one who could do that. So the questions came to me. Can you do a software or an organizational audit about records management and auditing based on the norms and standards that were almost made obligatory by the Dutch government? At the moment, 2003, 2004, that I did my first audit. And then the problem came, and I was aware of that. If there was only one person who consults on the combination of business administration, business informatics, and archiving, and there was only one person at that moment who is doing audits about the same disciplines, then you got very, very interesting questions on an ethical side, because when I do an audit in an organization, checking them on what you're doing, is it possible at that same time, based on an audit, to consult that organization about what they have to do?
Mm-hmm.
Can I use an audit that I've done myself to prepare for an audit, prepare for a consulting project?
Yeah.
And the other way around, when I've done consultancy with a company, can I do an audit on that? I've talked with a lot of people about that, also specialists in ethics. I read a lot about it, and I came to the conclusion that it's almost impossible to do so, because when you're doing an audit and you give them a declaration of compliance or a certificate, and you're going to consult with them based on that audit, you are going to consult on your own work.
Yeah.
Because there are conclusions, you propose measures they have to do to comply with the standard. And I came to the conclusion I cannot do that if there is not a time period between an audit and a consult and advising them. So I took into my own practice, when I'm doing an audit, it's not possible for me for 3 years to do consultancy over them. And the same way around, if I'm having done consultancy with you, it's not possible for me for a period of 3 years to do an audit. And then the questions came, yes, but if you be a consultant with us and we want an audit, we have to wait for 3 years. It's impossible because the government asks for compliancy, and we have to have proof that we are compliant. And that was a moment that I decided to do only consultancy at a high level, at strategy level, and doing audits at operational and tactical level. And that means checking software, checking processes on archiving based on the norms there are, and only doing strategic consultancy, mostly in enterprises. Audits are mostly for government organizations, so mostly, not all. So that's the reason why I, based on ethics, became more an auditor than a consultant. It was by awareness in the market that I got questions from Can you do consultancy and auditing at the same time? No, it's not possible. You can't do that. You have to make a decision to change.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, that's another breakthrough. You are the first one who doing something. It's a niche market. Based on the fact that you are a pioneer or the only one who is doing something, you got questions that are very difficult to answer if there is only one person who is doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Then it becomes automatically an ethical situation. And I found it impossible to do two things at the same time. So you can't do that as a company. It's not possible.
Yeah.
So that's the reason why my consultancy became quite different after the moment I started with my audits.
Yeah.
And now at this time, we do some consultancy strategic for company boards or something like that.
Yeah.
But not from how they should archive. Then it's about what is our position in the digital transformation that we have now. What should we do? What are the trends and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So my consultancy changed, and I'm for 90% of what I'm doing today, I'm an auditor.
Yeah, it's interesting how you've been so focused on this particular thing and how it basically, at least to me, tells a lot about integrity. Because I think a lot of how I see it, based on what you've described now in terms of the ethical aspect, is that if you do an audit and a consultation, like, will you go into doing an audit in a very biased way where you're going to try to highlight things that you're good at in terms of consulting, and also the vice versa? Yeah. And I guess this is all of the, and among with a lot of other things, was, I guess, a lot of the thoughts that went into the thought process and the reasoning for, okay, let's only do auditing. Yeah. But you've had, if I recall correctly from our previous conversation, you had, when I asked you, Carl, like, okay, what's been the breakthroughs that you've had? You highlighted 3, and they were like, 1, starting the consultancy like 30 years ago. Yeah. The second one was getting into academic research, and then the third one was shifting that, what we now just talked about, which was shifting from consulting to auditing. Kind of like, if you were to kind of, or try to highlight, what would you say were the 3 key highlights or 3 key learnings from each of those 3 moments?
The key learning from consultancy, was that you have to be pragmatic in the sense that if your core business is archiving, you do not need to say that it is about archiving. You have to present an image in which you say that you are trying to improve data management and information management in a complete information value chain. And in that information value chain, it's generating until the end, that's archiving, and then you can mention that what you do, but the core is your information value chain, not archiving. Yeah. Even if that is what I wanted to do, really wanted to do. That's the first breakthrough. The second breakthrough was that because I have published a lot, even scientifically, did conferences, and they asked me from the Institute of Archival Research in the Netherlands to become a member, and that meant that I could do scientific research. I became an assistant professor at the University of Amsterdam and the University of Applied Sciences Amsterdam, primarily for archival studies, which were educational projects that I did there. And second, to do research. And that was a real breakthrough, because at that time I could combine my experiences in practice, in what was going on in organization, government organization or business organizations. I could scientifically research theory and use theory in practice. Another way around, I could use my experience in practice to build theories or improve theories or whatever. What was very interesting at the moment, I could use my scientific research to improve my standing, not me, but my knowledge or my experience to companies and government organizations, to make me a more respected consultant at that time, auditor. So that was a real breakthrough. It was possible because I got a scientific background. I've got 3 scientific degrees, which made it more easy to integrate in the academic community because that's a very specific world. And they have their own morals and their own behaviors, and you have to mix in that very well. So that was the second breakthrough, a very important one for me, because what I'm doing now, besides my auditing activities, is primarily research. So I think my company now, the activities I do in my company is 75% of my time, but 25% is research. And that's about complete digital transformation that is being on the road around us for a long time already, but not really completed yet, if it ever will be completed. And everything what is happening, trends, but also the positive and the negatives, and what the consequences of that are for individuals, but especially for organizations.
Yeah.
And so all news, the effect of artificial intelligence, the effect of the environment, about what we're doing, sustainability in information technology and information management, that are all core. So that was the second breakthrough, which I think even the most important one. The third breakthrough was changing from consulting to auditing. But I think when I'm looking back now, I started with academic research at the end of the 90s. I think that looking back, that was the most important breakthrough for me, because from that moment on, my consulting was more based on scientific insights and scientific results. The methods I used were more scientifically underpinned. And my research made it possible for me to always at the front of developments. And it would have had more effect when I would have a very big consultancy, but I had an auditing, but I could walk in front of everyone when doing audits, and my knowledge was that big that even in audits I could learn companies a lot. So that's I could share my knowledge, and that was always very much appreciated. So I think the second breakthrough was, looking back, the most important one.
Yeah, it's interesting how, because I've been dabbling about this in terms of, I had a guest on a while back that also, he came from the scientific community and went into business. I remember he telling me that Anwar al-Haji was his name, and he told me about his surprise on how little scientific approach businesses typically tend to have to these things. It's kind of like super glue and duct tape in a lot of cases, not properly scientifically grounded in terms of the methodologies. And it sounds like getting that helped you gain an additional credibility, gain an additional authority, help you empower in terms of the thought leadership position that you established and have established yourself as towards businesses. Would you say that, or to what degree would you say that has helped you in the communication and discussion and dialogue with businesses to gain entry in, let's say, the last decade?
It worked both sides. It worked to both ways, I have to say. Theoretical underpinning a scientific position makes you more interesting for business to ask you for consultancy or for audits, and to integrate scientific knowledge in business processes and business methods. And it worked also the other way around, because you got a lot of experience in how in business, in business methods and business processes, and in the pragmatic way in a business scientific methods are used. It helped in scientific research because knowledge about that was overall low, but there were many pragmatic results from business methods that could be quite interesting for science. So it worked both ways. But it helped me a lot in getting credibility in getting a respected position as a company. You may be the only, but doesn't mean that you are as respected as I have become. So and that's what that second breakthrough helped me to do.
Yeah, you mentioned a keyword in terms of AI, because like everything is changing, and you also, I think you touched upon this, which was we never know when we're going to be quote unquote done. We call it like the digital transformation and stuff. AI is all the rage these days. It's a trend. It's been for the past 2 years, and it's just I would argue that it's growing. But how do you see AI be part of this? Because there's a lot of concern in terms of privacy. There's a lot of concern in terms of perseverance. What type of data do you store? And also all of the, let's say, computational power that this takes, and also in terms of the environmental aspect of it. Like, what's your take on this as kind of like a new change in how society basically operates? Because it's gonna change this.
That's happening a lot with AI. First thing I always say, not everything they call AI is AI. Yeah. There's an awful lot of software that works with complete automation that isn't AI, but that works exactly well. Yeah. And I know we got artificial narrow intelligence and everything which makes it possible to automate workflows and processes without a lot of machine learning or without a lot of rules is many times called narrow intelligence. That's okay. Those are the most successful ones. And when we talk about privacy as collecting of personal data, yes, when you are in social processes or in society using artificial intelligence, collecting all data about people who are going to restaurants and cafes and festivals and so on, and you got cameras and you are going to analyze those images and collect all the data you can have. Yes, privacy is an issue, a real issue, but it's also a security issue, a very big. Yeah. When you are applying AI in an organization, you have to be extremely clear about what data you have, where they are. You have to say something about can it be trusted? Is their quality in order or is it not? And if it's not, and you're going to use it in AI, it's garbage in, garbage out. That hasn't changed. No. If your data are wrong, it doesn't matter which technology you use, but the results of working with bad data will meet bad results. That's always AI exactly the same. But AI has a possibility to learn, but you can only use that when your management of data is in order. So AI is not going away; it's staying. So we have to deal with that way. So we have to prepare for a good use of AI. The narrow intelligence we can control a little bit. When we talk about general intelligence or super intelligence, we're not there yet. If we ever will be, that means that the intelligence is on par with or is higher than the intelligence a human has, and we have some problems with that. The AI that works nowadays is deductive, is using deductive strategies to use intelligence, but our decisions are intuitive, are not really deductive. Intelligence, human intelligence is largely intuitive. We use data, but we also use our experience and our feelings and that's all. And then we take a decision. There's never been a decision that's completely based on data when a human is part of the process. When artificial intelligence can take a decision and it is a process that is based only on data, you can take deductive decisions, but not when people are working in the same process. So AI is there. Narrow intelligence is most successful. It's working. Narrow intelligence, for instance, is doing one task or one process, and only that doesn't have a context only within that process. We can define the process, we know which data are in the process, we know what the problems are, so we can code, for instance, a workflow to work completely independent and automatic within that domain. But don't ask a question which is not related to the process it's working, because it doesn't have an answer. When we have more general artificial intelligence, then it's contextual. And it is a self-driving car which can navigate unknown roads. It can talk to a passenger about what he wants to do. It can mention the most wonderful hotels, the most wonderful nightclubs, and so on and so on. Everything we can do today in different apps and in different services, but the general intelligence combines it in one. We are not that far now. What we can do for that, also to prepare, is to what do we want to do with AI? Which things are allowed to do with AI and which are not? Which data are allowed to use and which not? What are the ethical regulations that we want to be part of each AI? And so on. We are using AI, but we don't have any rules. There's AI Act now from European Union, okay, there is one. But we don't have ethical rules. There are many things we do not want to do now, and we don't even want to do that with AI. So if that is what you don't want to do, then you have to regulate that. So you have to think about the ethical foundations and the legal foundations of the use of AI. And then you have to, then there will always be problems. There will always be privacy or personal data that are part of processes. And there's always the possibility that AI will be hacked, or that it will do something completely different that we wanted to do because we didn't code it in the right way. It's always a possibility, but it's a possibility now too, even without AI. But AI is social. It can do very, very, very good things. It can make organizations more effective. It can make them more efficient. It can make their customers, it can offer their customers many services that were unknown now, with recommendations, with assistants, speech assistants that help them in finding where they have to be in the process of an organization or in the departments of an organization. It can make many things easier, but there are consequences. One of those consequences is the environmental impact. That's one. We got already the security and the privacy effects, but there's an environmental impact. All the profits the IT industry has made from 2012 in their environmental effects have been washed away with the effects of AI and the computing power that is needed to work with AI in the last 2 years. So when I start completely anew with the environmental effects of IT, the companies have to go with it. They don't have a choice. They can't say van but the environmental impact is very big, so I'm not going into AI. That's your death sentence as a large company. So you have to do that, but they have to realize that they have to up everything they've done to make their effects on the environment lesser than they have been. And they have to do a lot more now to make their environmental efforts more successful. An example, training GPT-4, only one training of GPT-4 uses just as much as water as a nuclear, how do you call it, as a nuclear
power plant.
As a power plant, yeah. Just as much water, so that's a lot. One training of GPT-4, you have a lot of trainings. So there's a lot of cooling water and a lot of carbon dioxide which is coming into the environment, much more than was expected. because there are a lot of data centers which are using power. With using artificial intelligence, a lot of computing power is necessary. Making one beautiful image using GPT-4 and DALL-E costs as lots energy as one engine of an airplane flying to Faro in Portugal. So that's a lot of energy. And nobody knows, not of the public. Companies know, of course they know. But the individuals who are hobbying with AI are using an enormous amount of energy to do that. So awareness, creating awareness about that, creating awareness about AI is very important, about privacy and about security and all that, but creating awareness about the environmental effects of AI is, I think, one of the most important things to do in the coming years.
Well, that's interesting. I think a lot of people don't know necessarily the environmental impact that they have and that what they make through their business, through what they do, through creating 250 images a week with Midjourney or DALL-E. Like, what's the consequence of all these things? So, but this took a bit of a different turn in terms of how I saw this. But I think it is interesting. I think it is important. I think as all new technology, it's not efficient in the beginning, and then it gets more and more and more efficient. Like you have, I stumbled across a couple of guys the other day that, do you know the Raspberry Pi? The very small, like $35 computer chip that you can buy. They're building a 3 billion AI parameter that can run on that one.
Yeah.
Like that's completely different ballpark in terms of efficiency of power when you compare it to GPT-4. That's running on these hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of clusters.
Solve its own problems. Technology will solve its own problems. So when we are developing more sustainable technology, the impact on the environment will be much lesser.
Yeah,
it is now, and AI is in its beginning stages. I'm not dramatic. I know that things will change, but now the effects are very big. So you have as a company, if you're using that OpenAI with ChatGPT-4, wonderful software, we have an impact. So we have to plant trees, a lot of them.
yeah,
For instance, you can do a lot of activities to mitigate the effects you have with your software, but you will have to do it. And you can't say we have an effect and we don't do anything. So that's what it's, or awareness about what the effects are and what you can do about it. That doesn't mean you can solve everything. It doesn't mean you have to stop. It can't be stopped. You're going on, but you have to be aware and you have to make people who are using your software aware of what is happening. Overall, global flying is much worse for the environment than the IT industry worldwide. But the effect of the IT industry is growing. Thanks to all those wonderful but very energy intensive technologies like AI. It will only become more in the coming years. So we have to be, as people, as individuals, as organizations, we have to be aware of what we are doing with it, what we want to do, and if it is necessary to do it and to use it, what am I going to do to mitigate the effects? Everyone has to think about, okay, I'm an artist, I'm making digital art, I'm using AI. There are a lot of problems with intellectual rights and on in the way it is now, but still I make something, an art form, and I'm using a lot of computing power. Okay, I'm going to make this, but what is the next question is, what do I do to mitigate the effects? I think it should be even part of education at starting at primary education and secondary to make students aware of the effects on the environment, not only of technology, but also of flying and cars and so on. And I think that there could be a lot improved in what we are doing in that way. We are not as good in creating awareness as in creating profit.
No, yeah. Awareness doesn't necessarily lead to profits, and I think the incentives aren't aligned necessarily. This has been super interesting, and I'm also looking at the time in terms of trying to figure out a natural way of, let's say, following this up, because I always ask an ending question to every single guest, and I gave you a bit of a heads up, and you gave me kind of like a hint to what that question was going to be like, or your answer going to be like. So I think this is kind of like a timely way to wrap up the AI and also the environmental thing, but also this episode in general. And the question I ask everyone, Geert-Jan, is if you could get an answer to one question related to your business and what you do, what would it be, and what would you like to know?
Yeah, I thought very long about that, because you mentioned it already in our preliminary communication. I think I know I've had an effect on companies with what I'm doing. I know that's for sure. But what I really would like to know, how I could measure that effect on the environment, my environment, my business environment, but also on society in general. What is my effect? What has been my effect with what I'm doing, and how to measure that on society? That is what I would like to know. A lot of things I know, but that is something which is unsure, and I think it stays unsure because I don't know how to measure that.
maybe someone watching or listening in are into this entire, let's say, evaluating environmental impact of certain things. Maybe they can reach out. But it is a very good question. I think we live in a very interesting time. Like, we have more environmental impact than we ever have had. We are in the very infancy of a technology that could basically change absolutely everything. And there have been scientific breakthroughs in terms of energy that might, within the next decade, completely revolutionize environmental impact in producing energy and electricity as well. But I think nonetheless, it's still important to, okay, what can we do? And what impact do we actually have, if it's a positive or if it's a negative? So this has been super, super interesting. If someone wants to read more, figure more out what you guys do, get in touch with you, Geert-Jan, what's the best place to find you, read, or get in touch?
Start with my LinkedIn page.
Mm-hmm. The LinkedIn page.
Best way in. And if you want to read things I've scientifically written, go to my ResearchGate page.
Yeah.
That's two best entries. We've not talked about a lot of what we did in our initial conversation. I want to give everyone one thing at the end of this podcast. I've made a lot of decisions in my business career. All those breakthroughs didn't come in one day, so I didn't go to bed one day and stand up the next one and I was completely different. No. You made a lot of thinking and a lot of decisions, and some of the decisions were wrong. What I want to give everyone, it's known already for a very long time, but there are many people, even in just like this, in a very dynamic environment, taking decisions is always difficult because there's always the possibility of failure. But if you don't take a decision, your failure will be much bigger because you don't reach what you want to do. So even if a decision is wrong, which it will be sometimes, you can learn a lot of that. Do that. Because if you learn from a decision, your next decision will be better.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to take decisions. Always look at them and see them as to be the right decisions, even if their effects are not what you think they should be. Because you can't control those. But you can control your decisions. Take them. They are the right ones, but they work not out in the context in which they had to be worked out. So always take decisions. Never come in a situation that you think, I don't want to take a decision and I'm not going to do it because I don't know what the effects are. You never do. Only work with the data and experience you have, your intuition. Don't let that hold you back in taking a decision. Even in business, but also in your individual life.
Yeah. Wonderful final recommendation and tip from someone that has a lot of decades of experience and made a lot of decisions that both were good, but also not necessarily the best decisions, but they always gave let's say, some learning either way. But Geert-Jan, this has been wonderful. I really appreciate you taking the time. I'm going to make sure that the link to LinkedIn is in the show notes and the description once this episode is to be published. So all I can say now is thank you for taking time and being part of the podcast.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much for this communication and for this podcast.